should be in, I have to say yes to that. Okay, recording in progress. All attendees should be in listen-only mode today, and I want to welcome you to our latest in our series that we're doing with the State Office of Rural Health in Ohio. We have several topics in a series of webinars and half-hour virtual office hours, and we did a full day workshop. So welcome to everyone that is joining us today. We will be recording today's event so that it can be archived not only on the UMTRC's resources and archive webinars, but also on a future State Office of Rural Health website for the state of Ohio. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And once I go through these slides and talk a little bit about website etiquette and some tips and tricks, then we will open it up for questions, and we will turn the recording off at that point. All right, so as I said before, welcome. Today we're talking about website etiquette and video conferencing presentation skills. This is a topic that we are addressing here at the Upper Midwest Telehealth Resource Center in conjunction with the Ohio Department of Health and the State Office of Rural Health of Ohio. So first we're going to start with some website etiquette. Instead of bedside etiquette, I've coined the term website etiquette. We'll talk about document cameras and lighting and backgrounds and distractions. And just, a lot of this is, you'll hear it and you'll say, oh, well, that makes sense. A lot of it is common sense, but sometimes when we're new at something, it's scary and we don't always think about ways to make it better. And especially, when you're first learning a new skill, you don't have a lot of confidence in it. So hopefully you'll gain some confidence through this this time that we spend together, and know that you are doing it right. So first thing with website etiquette is just to be respectful. So here we're talking about a relationship that a patient and a provider are either establishing for the first time via video conferencing, or maybe they have an ongoing relationship and they've decided for whatever reason that a virtual visit, it meets the needs. They don't need an in-person visit for the particular session. So the provider, regardless, should act as if they're walking into a patient room in their normal clinic. They need to introduce themselves and look like, dress as if they were in person seeing patients in their office. There's a lot of different ways to address this. I've seen organizations use virtual backgrounds, which certainly I make use of. I prefer my normal natural background that I have here today in my home office. I do have logos that I got from printed on canvas that hang on my walls to help provide some of my credentials. If I sit up straight, you can see my logo on my shirt for UMTRC. So you can incorporate that into, what you're wearing, if you're wearing a lab coat or a name tag, those types of things. You also, as a provider, want to ask or let the patients know if there's someone in your room. If I'm in a physician and I've got a resident or a student sitting with me, we're going to make sure that we're both on the screen. That there's no surprises to the patient if someone else comes into the background here and talks with me. And since I am in my home office today, I've put a sign on my door, I've locked my door. My pets are downstairs behind baby gates, and I have muted all of my devices. I've turned off my email. I've muted my cell phone, and I forgot to, I have a do not disturb function on my phone, and so I just turned that on. So hopefully I won't be distracted. And I'll go through some other tips, what I've done in my environment here that might be useful as well. So from the patient's perspective, The patient should also introduce themselves. I know some providers who, when they come into a video room for a telehealth visit, basically ask the patient, hey, and you try to establish that they've got the correct patient on the line, will say, hey, are you, Becky Sanders? And yes, I am Becky Sanders. And I verify my birth date so that they know that they are talking to the correct patient. Patients also should dress as if they're going into the office. Casual today, wearing a t-shirt. We just had our conference earlier this week. So it's a casual kind of day here for me, but I'm still wearing, a shirt that has my professional logo on it, and I've got my professional logo in the background. As a patient, if I've got other people in the room, I should let them know that. I was speaking with a genetic counselor who had been working with a patient, and all of a sudden at the end of the visit, the patient's spouse started talking, and the provider was really taken aback. They would have reacted a little bit differently and included the spouse in the conversation if they had known they were there. If I was downstairs at my kitchen table with my dogs running around as a patient or as a provider, that's just not very respectful. And it's certainly on the onus of the provider to say, if there are too many distractions, to say, maybe we should reschedule this. I've heard about patients that show up for telehealth visits and they're pushing a shopping cart down the aisle of a grocery store or another shop, or they're in a car driving, or outside at a park. Certainly you want the patient environment as well as the provider environment to maintain some modicum of privacy. You certainly don't want the patient's personal health information broadcast to the world in general. All right, so telemedicine room design. Prior to the pandemic, we were often talking about a patient being in a clinical office visit scenario at a clinical location and the provider just being at a distant clinical location. Now that patients are allowed to be at home, it changes things just a little bit, but the basics are the same. If you're having a visit with a patient, then it's really more of a conversation. The patient could be anywhere, but the basics you need are those video conferencing audio visual platforms, so that there is both voice and video shared at the same time between the patient and the provider. We'll talk a little bit about lighting and acoustics and wall color later, but really you just think about what you need just to have a normal conversation. So, the patient and provider will each have to have some type of device to log into. The provider's organization will have to choose some type of video conferencing platform for that visit to happen. And you really don't need much more than that. There are many apps that are available now that are HIPAA compliant video conferencing platforms that you can download to your smartphone, to your tablet, to your laptop, or on your computer, and basic broadband internet access. You don't need much more than that. So if you're using and the patient is coming into a patient exam room, you just need the basics: a place for the patient to sit, a device for the patient to use, and hopefully it's not. We'll talk about distractions some more later. Hopefully it's not near a busy stairwell or near the entrance to the emergency department where you hear ambulances coming in, or near a helipad where helicopters might be coming in, those types of things. And then depending upon the type of telehealth service that's being provided, if you're doing education, you might need a larger room. Maybe you bring a bunch of patients together for diabetes self-management education, and the clinician is remote and is being presented on the screen. There's lots of different options here. So the needs surrounding the patient location and the provider location are going to differ based on the type of services being delivered during that telehealth visit. Switching gears a little bit to talk about technology. 10 years ago, we were pushing these really clunky, heavy, expensive telemedicine carts around. They sometimes are still used because certainly, they can be used at patient bedsides and rolled around the hospital in an inpatient setting. But there's also mobile kits that can be purchased now that are a lot cheaper. I think the basic price, and it's going to vary vendor to vendor, but if you're looking at purchasing a roll around cart with a bunch of different digital peripherals, which we'll get into in a moment, like digital stethoscopes or otoscopes, you're probably talking $15,000 or more. Some of these mobile devices that are in tough totes that could be used in a school setting or in a home setting if there's a nurse that travels around to many patients, or even in an ambulance setting. Those sometimes start in the $5,000 to $7,000 range, and they go up. These are 3 examples of digital stethoscopes. So because we are federally funded, we have to maintain vendor agnostic views. So we always present a minimum of 3 different things anytime we talk about specific products that are purchased from vendors. So this is the Littman stethoscope, ThinkLab stethoscope, and the Echo stethoscope. So there are other vendors out there. These are some of the most popular on the market. And there's even things that you can plug into your cell phone now to record heart and lung sounds and see that video or that digital infographic of those heart and lung sounds on a smartphone. Here's 3 examples of very popular exam cameras, can be used as dermoscopes. Many of these, you can see here this extra piece that fits on the front of this AMD camera, similar to the GEDMED horoscope. You can switch out and have, tongue depressors like you see here in the AMD, or you can have otoscopes, all kinds of different configurations for these cameras. I want to talk a little bit about the convergence between healthcare data and electronic medical records and electronic health platforms or electronic medical records. So again, this is some information that came from ehrintelligence.com, but just thinking about over the last, some of these go back about 10 years, that integration between data and video and how different platforms have come to be and are available to us. You don't have to invest in a electronic health record in order to have a video conferencing platform, but sometimes your organization may have a desire to integrate those two and have a electronic health record that has that video module built into it, so there is no duplication in data entry, those types of things. Your patient's record and previous visits and historical information and family history, all of that is right at your fingertips as a provider when you are in that visit with the patient. So that just a little bit of history, you can see here, Epic was the first system to integrate a video portal or a patient portal in 2012. Cerner partnered with Amwell in 2016. In 2017, both Allscripts and Meditech added video conferencing modules in their electronic medical records. And then Athena Health introduced one in 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So different modalities, and this is really kind of spun on its axis during the COVID-19 pandemic. Telehealth really used to be a business to business arrangement, because at the provider location, wherever the provider was at, was a clinical healthcare setting, and wherever the patient was at was a clinical healthcare setting. And today that's simply not true. Patients could be at home, providers could be at home. Um, all of the waivers during COVID-19 have opened it up so that each end of the telehealth session can basically be anywhere, as long as they're using a HIPAA compliant video conferencing platform. Now, I am aware somebody may say, play devil's advocate and say, but it doesn't have to be HIPAA compliant right now during the pandemic, and that's true. But my belief is that we are coming to start to open things up and coming towards the end of the pandemic. And my gut says that all of the HIPAA regulations will come back in full force once the pandemic is over. So our recommendation from the Upper Midwest Telehealth Resource Center is to make sure that you, as an organization, take the time and due diligence, do your homework, make sure you choose a HIPAA compliant platform so that you're not caught flat-footed when the pandemic ends. Also, when patients are in their home, they have access to, well, I guess they have access to them everywhere, but different digital apps on their smartphone or tablet or wearable devices that do keep track of some of their vitals, and those are certainly able to be given to a provider in lieu of having a medical assistant come and take my blood pressure or take my pulse, those types of things. My wearable on my wrist can help provide some of that information. So when we look back to 2017, many states in the 4-state region that we covered, that the Upper Midwest Telehealth Resource Center covers, that includes Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. Ohio made some changes back in the 2017 timeframe, and this was really at the heart of, or the height of the COVID-19, or I'm sorry, got COVID on my brain, the opioid pandemic that hit our nation so hard. There were changes made to statute, to Ohio code, as well as other state codes, administrative codes, that allowed the patient and the provider to meet for the very first time on a video conferencing platform. There are certain clinical standards that have to be met. You have to have the create an electronic medical record for that patient and have their family history, and all of those things have to happen. But then you can start prescribing, or a provider with prescribing ability can start prescribing on that very first visit. This is extremely important in cases of behavioral health. In a school setting, it could be very extremely important if a kiddo's got an earache and they're able to find that the kiddo does have an ear infection. They can order antibiotics and have that kid start their course of antibiotics that same day. So I've also got the link here to the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency's Diversion Control Division. It says basically the same thing, and that specifically is for controlled substances. So when we see a patient at home, we're going to do a couple of things, especially if it's the very first visit between that patient provider. We're going to obtain consent from the patient, and the language from the administrative code of each state is just a little bit different, but we do have templates on our website at umtrc.org under resources and sample forms and templates. So there's language there for consent and information on documentation. Documentation, each state is a little bit different in what they want you to document during the visit, how long that information should be kept, those types of things. You can read a consent document verbally during a telehealth visit, and the patient can consent verbally. Then you record that in the patient's record. If your organization has a process of obtaining consent via a paper copy, like the HIPAA paperwork that patients have to fill out at the beginning of each year for each doctor, You might later, snail mail something to the patient so that you can get that back in writing. You might have a patient portal where you can get that signature back in writing. Some organizations also say that, well, if the patient has accepted a telehealth visit, then they're implying that they already consent to having this telehealth visit. So each organization needs to figure out what works best for them. Privacy and distractions, I've talked about that a little bit. We'll get into that a little bit more. And I've talked a little bit about vital signs, and it is okay for the patient to take their own vitals and provide that. When you document that information, you need to put in the medical record or the patient record that those vital signs were taken by the patient. And that's just, just to be clear about how things actually happened and transparent about that. Physical exams. So I do get asked a lot about physical exams because there are some providers that feel that they cannot adequately take care of a patient if they have not laid hands on that patient. But most homes today do have scales, do have thermometers, depending on your patient's situation. If they've got a condition that requires them to take their blood pressure or their pulse ox on a regular basis, they might have those devices in their home. So as an example of smaller devices that are more and more prominent in the market, here again is another example of a different vendor's Tough Tote that can be carried around. This one has a little bit more peripherals in it. There's you can blow and get your lung rating. This one can take heart and lung sounds, as well as has things on the back of it that you can do a tongue depressor, that type of thing. You can look in the ears. There's a digital otoscope. And this display, you can hook up a variety of different things, blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, those types of things. And I took a screen grab from Amazon, just an example of a bunch of different blood pressure cuffs. They do start in like the $25 range. Most times you can get a blood pressure cuff between $25 and $40. It's not terribly expensive. If you're tracking chronic heart failure patients or patients post-surgery, you may see about actually giving devices to patients to be returned in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. One doctor's perspective, I've helped my parents with a lot of visits during COVID, and a lot of them have been via telehealth. We went in person to see one of my mother's doctors, and he is probably in his 60s, I would guess. He was talking about or telling us a story about taking his mother to the doctor, and his mother was complaining that her doctor hadn't laid hands on her. And he was like, "Mom, they can tell by the way you're walking around, how your posture as you're sitting, how you get in and out of a chair. They can tell a lot about your physical health just by being very observant." Now, sometimes that can be a little bit more difficult via telehealth because we have a smaller view of each other in a small screen, but those things still hold true. I mean, if I'm sitting here and talking and I'm holding my elbows, do I have pain in my shoulders? If I'm slumped over, does my back hurt? What's my posture? And those are different things that clinicians can learn to adapt with their webside manner with patients. Speaking about vital signs, I've gathered some information here from the U.S. National Library of Medicine and the National Institute of Health that were created during the COVID-19 public health emergency to help providers with how to obtain vital statistics or vital signs for their patient. An example of, how should patients take their own vital signs to present them to their provider? So they want to weigh themselves and the patient should weigh themselves the morning of the visit. When they're taking their blood pressure, they shouldn't be running up and down stairs right beforehand. They should sit quietly so that they have better chances for a steady blood pressure. Take their temperature and their pulse ox. So this is available here as a 10-step checklist. Additional information, by keeping your patient local to their home and their local environment, any of those revenues for follow-up, x-rays, exams, blood work is going to be kept local in the local economy. And healthcare is a huge portion of the local economy and the local business engine of any small community. So here's some additional resources about that and physical exams. I love this one in particular. This Old Dominion University put together a series of videos. One of them is about teaching a patient to palpate their abdomen to do a self-exam. And the provider in the video does an awesome job of having the patient reposition the camera so the provider can see what's going on and watch the patient do that exam. So a little bit more technology. These are some document cameras, and we're in the midst of creating a demo studio in our offices in Indianapolis for a variety of different telehealth disciplines. And we purchased some document cameras specifically with the thought of genetic counselors and geneticists, because oftentimes when they're meeting with a patient via telehealth, they're drawing the patient's pedigree and their family tree and doing that so they could draw on a piece of paper, and this document camera could show that to the patient on the other side as they're doing it live. And again, we're vendor agnostic, so 3 different vendors' solutions for document cameras. All right, as we finish up today, I'm going to talk about some examples for lighting, what I call the junk in the trunk, which is your background, and eye contact. So you really want a clean and uncluttered view between you as the provider and that patient. In order to do that, you have to use the camera. So the webcam or the external webcam or built-in camera on your device. So here in my home office, I have 2 screens, 2 large monitors, and my slides are on this monitor. On this monitor, I have my self view of myself, and I've put it right up underneath of my external webcam on my monitor. So my camera is here and my self view is here. So it's awkward. It takes time to get used to. It's really weird. But just as if you're getting your picture taken in a large group setting, you want to focus your eyes. Oh, there you go. Focus your eyes on the camera. And when I drop my eyes down just a tad to my self view, then it should look, hopefully, it looks to you as I'm very engaged and establishing that eye contact so that we are establishing the rapport during this time that we have together today. Lighting. So you want diffused lighting or soft lighting around you, both as a provider and as a patient. You don't want a lot of shadows. You want to place lights in front of you so that you are not in shadow. Here in my office, I've got a hutch behind my monitors, and I've got a gooseneck lamp that has soft white light or daylight with it, and that gooseneck is turned so that the light goes up to the white ceiling and comes back down. I also have a window here on my left. I've got that window closed so that I don't get a lot of glare from the window, and that helps reduce any shadow on the right side of my face. You don't want a lot of light behind you. For example, in this picture, she's got a lot of harsh, bright sunlight behind her. and that creates a lot of glare. It's hard to look at her and hard to see what's on that paper that she's holding up. Just by changing the angle of the camera, you can see her much better, and you can actually start to read that there are words on that piece of paper that she's holding up. Here's another example of backlighting. If he would close the blinds behind him, then that would be a lot better. He's got a good background. You can see that he's a professional. He's very educated. He's got on his jacket with the logo of his organization and his name and title. So that's a very professional background. As far as different examples of lighting, we got a couple of different lamps and took different pictures. Both of these lamps have adjustable lighting. The one here on the left with the tablet stand on it, the wings of light can go from the side to the front to the back, and they've got different, you can set different hues of light. Same with this gooseneck floor lamp here. You can bend that light in different ways and change it like 15 different hues. As we finish up today talking about distractions, I talked about having my door shut and locked, telling people that I was on a call, that I should not be disturbed. But another thing to think about is when you're taking notes. If you're not taking notes, well, even if I was taking notes on my screen here where my slides are, and I'm over here and I'm talking to you, but you see the side of my face, that's not very engaging. Or if I'm taking notes here, or even coming down here on the other side of my desk, now my voice is going into my desk and you're seeing this side of my face. That's not very engaging. But if I was a provider and I said, just a second, let me take some notes. Do that, and I come back, I reestablish that eye contact. That is much more personable and much more respectful of my patient. And then external noises. Sometimes we just can't control the environment outside of our four walls. If there's a rainstorm or a thunderstorm outside, if there's mowing, if there's construction, traffic noises, loud elevators, those types of things, we can't always control our environment. We do have control over our background though. So the impact of the wall color of the background is important. You certainly don't want a cluttered background of all this coffee stuff, but this, the cream color on your background, these stumps of wall, is not too bad. Studies have shown that ideal wall colors are light blue and gray. They work well with all skin tones. Again, you want that clean and uncluttered background behind you. It's just more professional. And as far as some of those noise distractions, there are things you can do around acoustics. If you've ever been in choir or orchestra or band, you've probably seen carpeting on the floors, which helps reduce echo, but sound tiles in the ceiling or on the walls to absorb sound, to help with the sound dampening. There's also sound dampening paint, or you can hang draperies over windows or around the room also to reduce drafts and absorb sound. So at this time, we've gone just a little bit over, but I'm still available here. I'm going to ask Carolyn to put our survey in the chat so that we can get your feedback, and also be happy to take any questions if you want to use the Q&A function. If you want to raise your hand on the video screen through the settings, you can do that and we can unmute you for questions. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. All right, I am not seeing any questions. Carolyn?
I don't see any either.
All right, well, thank you everyone for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.